The ANC in Gauteng says it will not be bullied by the DA. The party insists Premier Panyaza Lesufi will proceed with the announcement of his new executive today. And this is in the context of ongoing disputes with the DA. In yet another dramatic turn of events last night, Lesufi again could not reveal the names of his MECs. Development ANC Provincial Secretary Decay Nciza blames on the DA.
There's no way that the Premier is not going to announce the executive of Gauteng. We will be led by the Secretary General and this negotiation team to try and see if we can find each other with the DA, because we're opening up for everyone. But once people believe that they must have more strength, or they want to dominate, or whatever the case might be, we want other parties to come and participate as the ANC, and we're very firm in saying so. With or without DA, we believe in Gauteng will be able to form government.
Nciza has accused the DA of trying to dictate which parties the ANC should work with.
So once a party comes and says, but don't bring this one, bring that one, and so on, we are not going to agree to such things. But of course, those parties who might not be speaking or engaging our national leaders, we might having different engagements with them. But every other party that is at the legislature is actually agreeing with the ANC, except for now, the Democratic Alliance. And we thought we must come and brief all of you, so that you don't think and believe that when DA says they've boycotted this announcement. You can't boycott something when you don't have an agreement. We don't have an agreement with them.
All right, so let's talk about this with Dr. Dale McKinley, political analyst. Dale, good morning. Thanks very much for being available to us. And, you know, we kind of look in askance here in the province, because we need a political direction. We need a provincial cabinet to be underway. And then you hear this kind of bickering, and the language really is unseemly. You know, the ANC saying the DA shouldn't behave like a spoiled brat. The DA saying the ANC is negotiating in bad faith. Just talk to us about the tone of all of this against the context of the fact that this is a very important economy, the biggest in the country and the continent, and we need to have a working provincial executive.
Yeah, I think it is disappointing. I think most people would expect. I mean, when this after the election results, and when we were all talking about, well, what is this going to look like, this coalition or this GNU, we mostly focused on the national level, and we saw that it was a fairly rocky road. As well, with backs and forth and demands being made in different positions and so forth. But they eventually found each other because there was really no other option. Now it's interesting because there always has been tension between ANC Gauteng and ANC National. So that's the one element I think that's playing itself out, is that there seems to be a desire on the part of the leadership of the ANC in Gauteng to prove itself somehow as being independent or somehow different than the dominant Ramaphosa-led national ANC. And that, I think, is having some kind of impact. But beyond that, I think it's about political maturity. It's the way I likened it earlier in a comment I was making was that Lesufi and Solly Msimanga are like two bulls in a crawl. And they're basically trying to prove to each other who's the strongest, and they're acting, sort of fairly immaturely in this case. And I think voters expect more. It's not that there's not going to be differences. It's not that there's not going to be some hard bargaining and disagreements. But fundamentally, what the voters did was they gave these parties a mandate to come together. Whatever that, however they do so, they need to do so. And so I think this sort of brinksmanship that you're seeing on the part of both probably the DA and the ANC. I'm not privy to the insider talks, but it seems as though both of them need to just back away a little bit, reassess things, find a middle ground. That's what compromise is all about, and not push for maximalist positions, and understand that it's not about the party, it's not about themselves, but it's about the voter.
I mean, you used the word brinkmanship, and that was one of the, it was in the lexicon of description, let's put it that way, for the GNU when we think about the negotiations, primarily pivoting and centered around the DA and the ANC. And we knew that the clock was ticking. We needed to get it done. Finally, that's been done. And whatever the criticisms are about how bloated that cabinet is, this is the cabinet that we have, and it needs to start working. A similar theme here in the province, that with every day passing, there is not only a political impact, but there is a service delivery impact. There's also an impact to business in the province. And I'd love for you to sketch that piece out for us, Dale, on these time delays. I mean, we were hearing that we might finally get an announcement today, but the impact of these delays in this announcement.
Look, I think more than anything else, people are just expectant. You know, you want something to happen. You want to happen quickly. You want certainty. That's understandable. But I think also there's a balancing part to that, which is that this is new for us as South Africans, as you know, in our political experience over the last 30 years. If we look at many other countries that have similar situations where they've had to form coalition governments or multi-party or whatever they call them, it's taken quite a long time, and it's often involved very, very difficult discussions. So I think there needs to be some patience, but the expectation is understandable. And yes, I think the major impact is that, you know, when you have a situation where the politics controls the bureaucracy so much, or determines what the bureaucracy does, which is not the best situation. You get a scene where, for example, in the province, as you mentioned, with service delivery, things sort of paralyze themselves. So the department doesn't want to move, it doesn't want to make any decisions, it doesn't want to roll out infrastructure unless there's clarity on the political side. What this tells us is that there's a need for a different kind of change, despite not just in terms of the multi-party and the coalition government, but also in the way in which the relationship between the political heads and the bureaucracy itself. And we need to separate these things out. One of the things that the GNU has promised is a professionalization of our public service, so that City Power, Joburg City Power, the Provincial Housing Department, the Provincial Health Department can move, irrespective of what the politicians necessarily are haggling about, because they've already got their mandate, they've got their, but it's the best situation that both come together. And so let's hope that in the next day or so they do that. But let's not rush this, because it's worse to have a bad situation done very quickly than to have a better one done in a longer period of time. So I would say we need to show some maturity and a little bit of patience, and particularly the politicians. And let's remember, I would say this to Premier Lesufi as well as Msoli Msimanga, that both of them, the DA got 20-something% of the vote, the ANC got 30-something% of the vote. You are not the majority parties. You are not all in control. You need to swallow your egos and your prides and get together and make sure that what is prioritized is exactly this. I live in Brixton in Johannesburg. We were without water for 6 days last week. And that is partially a result of the infrastructure, but it's also a result of what you're mentioning, this paralysis and people not wanting to act. So let's get that act together so that people can move forward. And once they do that, then there'll be some confidence and some positivity. The longer this takes, the more negativity there will be.
Yeah, and I drive past, your area, because, I live not too far away. But just with every passing year, you see the state of decay, especially in the high streets, which, you see the complete absence of the enforcement of things like bylaws. And people who own property there are also concerned about, the value of those investments. You talked about the political balance of power in the province. The DA this time at 26.6%, and the ANC for the first time since 2019 losing their majority. I think it was 50.1% to now 36.4%. But it's about achieving this sort of sweet spot in a GPU, this term that we're using now, Government of Provincial Unity, which is the provincial equivalent of that GNU. You've got this massive 80-seat Gauteng provincial legislature. You've got 28 seats by the ANC, DA 22, EFF 11, the MK has got 8, Action SA 3, the FF Plus, and so on, and then it trickles down to the others with 1 seat each, like the IFP, Build One South Africa, and Rise Mzansi. How do they do this? You heard Salim Simanga say yesterday, the ANC said that they would they were going to consult their PEC, then they were going to revert to us. They didn't revert to us, and then made this announcement. The ANC is saying we will not be told who to bring to the table and who to exclude from the table. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening just under the hood before we can get this engine running coherently, Dale. So what should we be expecting today to achieve that concept and practice of a GPU? And how does the ANC, who's still in the driver's seat on this one, achieve the kind of political unity that the president is now being lauded for having achieved in the country?
Well, I think first, the first thing is that in the ANC in this case, the national must talk to the provincial. They must get together internally, because part of this, I'm convinced, is part of an internal ANC power politics. It's not simply just about the DA. It's not simply about other political parties. It's about a tussle that has been going on for quite some time, and particularly between Gauteng and the national ANC. So they need to sit down themselves, and some hard talk needs to happen. I mean, in any political party, and particularly the ANC has said this, you have rules, you have your own constitution, you have things, and people cannot just sort of decide because they're piqued or because they're angry at an opposition that they're going to hold things up as a result. So that's why I call maturity, but also responsibility to your own organization and its own principles, and following the national example. I mean, despite what we could argue would be many criticisms about possibly the makeup of the GNU and how it's been done, the fact of the matter is it's there. And I think that's what people expect. So in the context of Gauteng, that's the first thing. The second thing is that the DA, the ANC, and other interested political parties, if this is going to be a GNU, then the DA must also accept that it might include people and other parties that they don't like. That's okay. That's the nature of compromise. It's the nature of a collective government. And so I think both need to just sit back, realize that, and put the interests of others and the people at the center as opposed to their own party interest. I know that sometimes is asking a lot these days, but it's a fairly minimal requirement in this context of a democratic responsibility. And thirdly, put a model together or an agreement together that is fairly airtight. In other words, that covers a lot of the different components of when you have disagreements, so that this what we don't want is you go ahead and announce a government and 3 weeks down the line it collapses, because that would then be worse for service delivery. It would be worse for stability. So better to take a little bit more time, sit back and actually crack the whip a little bit on this from the top down to the province and say, get it done. If it takes you another day or two, that's fine. But let's get something, and let's get it done to where we might not like each other, but we're going to have to work together, and we're going to have to make that delivery. I think it's a fairly simple process in procedural terms. It's a very difficult political and ideological process, and I think this is in some ways the conundrum that we find ourselves in, is that many people want to look at the big ideological and political questions and say, well, I can't work with that person. But the voters have told the politicians, you must work together, irrespective of your differences. And if the politicians are going to listen to that, and in Lesufi and Mr. Manga must listen to that, otherwise, further down the road, they're going to get punished even further. So they must, I think, swallow that pride, learn the lesson, take the hits, find the collective way forward, and make their government work in that context.
All right. Well, it's a story that we keep telling and that has chapters and layers added to it minute to minute, hour to hour, Dale. So we'll see how it all stacks up. We are expecting an announcement, I believe, sometime today, but we'll see if it does materialize. As you say, rather take the time, be sure, move with certainty rather than with haste. Political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley sharing his thoughts on the Gauteng provincial or the government of provincial unity, the GPU as we're calling it.